Music is emotions, tension, awe, dread, intensity of battle, or the triumph of victory. My name is Mikko, and I'm going to tell you about game music, concerts, and orchestras. It's 2020, and almost everything's cancelled, but not quite everything. I'd like to start out with a quote from Jagmo. The state of emergency has been lifted in Japan, but it will take more time to bring the situation under control. So please take care of yourself. Now, within the context of live concerts, we must consider three things under the current situation. Public health measures, responsibility of the producers and the organizers, and for us to take care of ourselves. So please consider these things when I talk about some live events that are. With that out of the way, I'm going to tell you how game music concerts were born, who organizes them, and the game music orchestras. I'm going to talk about the things we can access right now on YouTube and Spotify. And I'm going to tell you less about the cancellations and the postponements, because this is a positive talk. I'm going to tell you more about the near future, about things we can enjoy. In 1974, Uchu Senkan Yamato aired on Japanese TV. This was an influential anime series, the Star Wars of Japan, if you will. Or Star Wars is the Uchu Senkan Yamato of America, because this came first. But back then, anime soundtracks, as we know them today, weren't really released. Only the anime songs, the opening song, insert songs, and the ending song. But that changed. In 1977, for the first time, anime background music was arranged into a symphonic suite Yamato. This caught the eye of the Japanese anime publishers and the music industry. You could, in fact, sell anime background music, and people would enjoy it as good music and buy it. Now meet Koichi Sugiyama, who's working on a wide range of works in the 70s. Commercials, anime music, film music, things like helping out with Godzilla vs. Hedorah and working on Science Ninja Team Gatchaman, the movie. And so it was that in the wake of Symphonic Suite Yamato, he too arranged Symphonic Suite Gatchaman and Symphonic Suite Cyborg 009. But Sugiyama also plays games, board games, arcade games, and video games. In 1985, he's playing shogi, a form, kind of a Japanese chess, the 8-bit version on his PC computer. And the game is published by Enix and comes with a floppy disk and a manual. But in the time before internet, we gave feedback on postcards, kind of like this one. And Sugiyama takes the feedback postcards, fills in his thoughts about the game. But there's this spot for the postage stamp. And putting on the postage stamp and actually taking it to the post office, that's a little bit mendokusai, a little bit troublesome. So he leaves it on the table. But his wife finds it on the table and takes it to the post office while doing her shopping. Now, Enix, as a game publisher, received this handwritten fan mail from a famous Japanese composer. And they decide to immediately contact him and ask him to compose for video games. A little bit later, he composes Dragon Quest I. And having all the connections with the recording industry, the orchestras, being a conductor himself, he arranges Dragon Quest Suite. Out comes the sequel, Dragon Quest II, and for that too, he arranges Sweet Dragon Quest II. Now, the thing about sheet music and arrangements is that once you have done it, why not you also play it live? It's good music, it's popular. So, out comes the first video game music concert ever, the first family classic concert. Now, Wikipedia tells me that there have been at least 20 Dragon Quest concerts, but Wikipedia is not always a great source. You see, there have in fact been 33 different family classic concerts, one every year. You can see the posters right there. From the composer's own website, sugimania.com. But that's not all. I counted some almost 400 Dragon Quest concerts in total during these years. And Sugiyama also holds 2 world records. One for the oldest video game composer alive. The second one for the first video game ballet inspired by a video game. That is Dragon Quest Ballet, that's still running to this day in 2020. What about other game series? 25th anniversary of Love and Courage, Fire Emblem Festival. That's a Blu-ray release. Legend of Zelda, 25th anniversary concert, 30th anniversary concert. And by that point, it's easier to say Concert 2018 to refer to the newest one. Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, Orchestra Concert 15th anniversary, Orchestra Concert. Then comes the Orchestra Concert 19, and you can also have both at the same time, 15th anniversary of Monster Hunter Hunting Music Festival 2019. But these are not widely available in the West. My point is, these exist. The Japanese appreciate music. They want to do these. But things are changing because things are slowly coming to Spotify and Western digital platforms. I picked these 3 examples. There are many more, but they're kind of hard to find because localization and crediting all of the different composers and orchestras isn't always the strong suit of video game companies. On the right, you can see Grand Blue Fantasy. It's a mobile game. And the music in that game is such a big deal that they hired Nobuo Uematsu to compose some of the tracks. And it's such a big deal that they had Japan-wide orchestra concert tour and also produced the album. To understand why, all you need to do is listen to the album and appreciate the quality of the music. And if you think about it, the games companies already have composers and arrangers on their payroll. They already hold the necessary, they are already the copyright holder, all chances, all likelihood. They already have the fan base for the different game franchises and games. And they have stuff to sell, video games, merchandise, soundtracks. All you really need to do is add an orchestra, a conductor, a concert venue, and some marketing, ticket sales. And this is the primary reason why most concerts in Japan are basically around one game franchise, or one particular composer. Now, there are so many concerts in Japan that I would say there's countless concerts. And these are the concerts that were meant to be in 2020. But alas, we have the situation. If you know your Japanese, it's saying cancelled or postponed. But not everything's cancelled. The thing about Japanese concerts is that if you go to Japan, chances are you have to either know Japanese or use a lot of Google Translate. But these websites exist in Japanese to tell which concerts are happening. So to tell you how Corona affected video game concerts. Firstly, Tokyo Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra has a gift for you. Dragon Quest and Studio Ghibli. It's on YouTube. If you've never listened to Dragon Quest music, this is your chance to hear it from them. And Tokyo Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra is the best choice because they've recorded all 11 Dragon Quest symphonic suites. Secondly, the big players are able to organize live-streamed concerts. Now, the next Dragon Quest live-stream concert is actually next week. It's on Nico Nico Live. And again, it's all in Japanese, but it's not region locked as far as I know. So with enough perseverance, you can get the payments through with a credit card. Sino Alice is a mobile game, recently released in the West. And it too has great music by the Nier series composer. And they decided to release the full concert in 2020 as a stay-at-home video. The Famikoto is a Japanese music ensemble that plays game music with the traditional Japanese instruments, the koto and the shokuhachu and the things. I bet you haven't. Yeah, Famikoto also did a live-streamed concert on YouTube recently. It's pretty easy to find, although there's no such channel as Famikoto. It's on a different name. Undertale, I bet you haven't heard it played by a mandolin orchestra. It's very different sound. And the 100 anime songs in 60 minutes, there's plenty of overlap between fan bases of anime series and video games. This is great music, and Akiba Winds plays both, emphasizing on YouTube production. And they've recently also done the kind of stay-at-home style of video where everybody records at home and then you put it into tiles. You may have seen on the concert listing, if you look carefully, that there are many video game orchestras in Japan. This all started in 2000 on the Nobue Uematsu fan forums, where someone posted the idea, why don't we play game music together in an orchestra? This formed the first one, Little Jack Orchestra, that held its first concert in 2003. Since then, it's fairly safe to say there are countless of these, and I don't even know of all of these. Some only have a Twitter page, a homepage, and one for recruiting new members. There are matchmaking services in Japan that match players by their skill level, by which day they can rehearse on, and what type of music they want to play. These are amateur orchestras that rehearse outside working hours or on weekends. Some are even one-shot orchestras that might only play one concert. I really like the naming of these. Recette amuse, recipe for fun. Some are also specialized in particular video games, such as Ritter de Musique for Fire Emblem music, Kanto Symphony Orchestra for Pokemon music. That is Kanto, the Pokemon region, not the Kanto, the region in Japan. And could talk of these the whole day. Also, Mithril plays Final Fantasy music. Some only play music from particular Final Fantasy games. And Thanks K plays music by Yoko Kanno. That hence, But I would say on YouTube, there's a bit of a language barrier. I claimed that I will tell you about something you probably haven't heard of. How about Touhou Winds, Lack of Mana Potions Ensemble, or the Hokkaido Game Music Band, Hiroshima Game Music Guild. Now, for the Zenzoku Game Music Brass, they don't even have a YouTube channel. It's just a playlist on another YouTube account. Just remember, don't trust Google Translate. Then I fooled you. Akiba Winds is actually really easy to find. Luida, that's a tavern in Dragon Quest. It's the place where new players go to find a companion for their journeys. They decided to name this Luida because it's the place where friends with the same goals gather. Game Band is also known as Game Addicts Music Ensemble. Nagaya Game Music Winds. And likewise, Tokyo Fantastic Brass Band. I love the naming. And Famikoto is also on various different YouTube channels, but it's easy to find. What about outside Europe? In the 1990s, Koichi Sugiyama, together with other Japanese composers, organized the first game music concerts. No, they're actually really called Gaamu Ongaku Concerto, game music concerts. And somehow, a certain Thomas Böcker in Germany heard about these and about the idea of video game concerts. Now, he was actually working as a producer, music producer for games in Germany. And he proposed the idea to a business development conference, games conference at the time. And they picked up the idea. So they had the convention from which they could get interested people and really celebrate the music in video games. They also had Czech National Symphony Orchestra because they had already been recording game soundtracks with that orchestra. And they had the famous Gewandhaus Hall in which to perform. But there were stumbling blocks. Thomas Böcker writes, it was convincing people of the idea was intense. This had never been done in Europe, and most people rightfully assumed there would be no demand for such a concert. The game publishers, it was really difficult to contact the right person because the games publishers had never received requests to license music from their video games to be performed live. Now, the idea was to play the music that had already been played on an orchestra. But when they went looking for the sheet music, sometimes that had become lost. And they had to transcribe like 1 or 2 tracks from listening to them. And there are always also different orchestra compositions, so you have to do a little bit of arrangement for that reason. But it was a critical hit. Sold out show, 2,000 people. And more concerts would follow. First, one each year, along with the Games Conference. And after that, then Games Conference itself went under, but the different concerts continued. And what's particular about these so-called Symphonische Spielmusikkonzerte, that's German for symphonic game music concerts, is that they make longer arrangements and try different concepts in there over the years. Some of these have been in Tampere because Jonne Valtonen had been making game music for the demo scene in the 1990s. And he knew Thomas Böcker and would end up arranging many pieces for these concerts. Now, there's a funny story how these longer arrangements became. You see, when you have a gaming event and you need a host, oftentimes what happens is you pick a host from outside gaming. And we as gamers can sense that it doesn't really fit well. It's sometimes really awkward and breaks the flow of the event, in this case, a concert. So Thomas Böcker and Jonne and others, they were kind of annoyed by this problem. Like sometimes the hosts are also really good, but sometimes, yeah. But with longer arrangements, there's other benefits. You can also get a deeper immersion and tell stories. I mean, you can tell a little bit about a story in one track, but with longer tracks, different instruments or different motifs can represent different characters. And there can be all sorts of interplay between the different instruments and how the orchestra reacts to the music and how it's all organic and alive. Not all people like this style, but these are basically the longest arrangements. First, in 2008, on Spotify, by the way, we have Symphonic Shades, music by Chris Hülsbeck, who, as it happens, was an honored guest back in TracOff 2017. Then we had Symphonic Fantasies. Fantasies in plural, because this is composed of 4 15-minute fantasies from different games from the Square Enix franchise. And by this point, they're touring around the world. When they toured Japan, it was recorded again. Now, why record the same tracks again? Don't you get the same result? Well, in classical music, you can play louder and you can play more softly. You can play faster and you can play slower. There's all sorts of little subtle differences. And it's basically the extension of what the musicians and the conductor is feeling when they're playing the music that affects the end result. And finally, we have Final Symphony. This is where the most classical formats are borrowed. A symphonic poem for Final Fantasy VI, arranged by Roger Vanamo. A piano concerto for Final Fantasy X. And finally, a 40-minute, 3-movement symphony telling the story of Final Fantasy VII. That is the classic Final Fantasy VII. And since then, Meregnon Studios productions are now going on to do Land of Silence, which is kind of a symphonic tale for children. Tell the story through music. It's going to premiere 2021 in Stockholm. The thing about Final Fantasy concerts is there's so many, they have a dedicated Wikipedia article. The long story short version is that the first Final Fantasy game is released in '87. Already in '89, in response to the Dragon Quest Symphonic Suites, Symphonic Suite Final Fantasy is made. In 2002, the first dedicated Final Fantasy music concert happens in Japan. And 2 years after Tour de Japon the tour around Japan, and then in North America. Now, Distant Worlds starts on the 20th anniversary from the first Final Fantasy game being released. It actually starts in Stockholm, Sweden, because of the different connections that have been made between the different arrangers, game publishers, game concert producers, and such like. Now, the way this works is whenever there's copyright Square Enix, that means they are the copyright holder. If anyone wants to make a Final Fantasy concert, they need to license the music from Square Enix. Now, with AVR music productions, the thing is, they actually have a close collaboration. Maybe Square Enix prints the CDs in Japan, in Japanese, and AVR Music does the same in English in the West. This is close collaboration, not just licensing. AVR Music does what they do best. They produce concerts and they produce albums. And the thing about being for a long time in the music industry is they know a lot of orchestras and venues all over the world. But the thing about these really long concert series, or in fact any concerts, is that they're organized well in advance. So any concerts we're seeing today have probably been agreed upon like 2 years ago. Hence why it's more of a question of whether they're cancelled rather than whether they're organized in the first place. As for the albums, there are 5 Distant Worlds albums. And the newer ones contain the newer Final Fantasy games, obviously. The other tour is called A New World, Intimate Music from the Final Fantasy. What that means is it's smaller ensembles, string quartets, and piano solos, and the like. The nice thing about those is you can really hear every pluck of the string and each musician individually. It's much more intimate in that way. Come 2020, we have suddenly a lot of time on our hands. So they had the time to do a Final Fantasy VII, the classic Final Fantasy VII music collection from all of the previous Distant Worlds and A New World albums. But they also had time to do another album, RPG National Anthem Variations. This takes the Final Fantasy main theme and plays it in the style of different national anthems on the classic guitar by the virtuose Sam Griffin. There's also the Final Fantasy VII Remake World Tour. And the tour dates might not be doing so well, but Square Enix is making the orchestral arrangement album. It's coming out next month. Supposedly the art isn't final. But they are not the only ones to make concerts. Now meet Tommy Tallarico. 21 years old. He leaves his parents crying on the front of their house and drives to Southern California to pursue a career in entertainment. For the first few weeks, he's homeless. He gets a job at a local music store selling keyboards. And one of the 3 t-shirts he took with him is a TurboGrafx 16 t-shirt. It's a video game console not yet released in the North America. And a guy from Virgin Games, working for Richard Branson, walks in. And he asks Tommy, what do you know about video games? And Tommy is like, I know everything about video games. So he takes another job, playing video games for a living. And while doing that, he keeps telling them like, hey, if you need music for your games, I'll do it for free. Just ask. And I'm basically skipping 10 years here, but he ends up being the most prolific video game composer, having worked on over 300 different video game titles. But Tommy also wants to reinvent symphonic music for a new generation, because young people don't go to the symphony. But classical music is awesome. So he wants to do a video game concert in the Hollywood Bowl. And for a little bit of context, it's a huge amphitheater of 11,000 people. In the pictures, you can see the Hollywood sign in the background. And people tell him, people who go to the symphony don't play video games, and people who play video games don't go to the symphony. So you're totally screwed. No one's going to show up. But Tommy's like, no, gotta do the bowl, gotta do the bowl. He risks $1.5 million of his own money, uses some phone calls all of the different game publishers to get their music, and different talent agencies, and arranges for the LA Symphonic Orchestra to play in the Hollywood Bowl. And what do you know? Sold out show, 11,000 people show up. From then on, once you do one concert, it's very repeatable. To this day, over the 15 years, Video Games Live is the most performed video game music concert ever. Over 500 concerts all over the world. They also hold multiple world records, including for the largest possible audience, and there are over 500,000 videos of Video Games Live performances uploaded by regular concert visitors on YouTube that have combined 150 million views. And I assure you, I'm only like 1 million of those views. The way Video Games Live is able to pull off 40 to 50 concerts a year, that is, before 2020, is that they handle the licensing, the sheet music, the videos, arrangements, lights, and they sync up all of these things with a click track playing on each musician's ear. And they mic up all of the different instruments individually and put it through a mixer to get a good sound out of it. Now, they employ local promoters to hire the orchestras and the venues. They only show up a few days before the concert to do the final rehearsal and do a whole lot of installing lights and effects and videos and all that. Now, the thing about this is, this means if you want Video Games Live into a particular city or country, you need to contact the local orchestras and concert organizers to make it happen. They listen to regular consumer feedback. Now, as for Video Games Live Helsinki, the one time they came to Finland, there was a petition on the internet that I found for Video Games Live to Finland. And it had about 50 signatures. And I'm not entirely sure if that tipped the balance, but such a story exists. Now, it's all fun and games telling about world records and big numbers. A big crowd looks like this. This is from Gamescom 2017 from the Video Games Live stage. And Blizzard, from the very start, has been a big supporter of playing their music live, of the Video Games Live, celebrating the video game music as a culture, as for its cultural value. And these concerts are actually available on YouTube because for many years, Blizzard streamed all of these Gamescom Video Games Live concerts live on YouTube. They're really easy to find. Now, Video Games Live also made albums. The first two albums were made with the old school recording labels. And they weren't actually too impressed. Tommy Tallarico notes, they don't believe in the culturally artistic significance of video games. And they believe that people are interested in listening after the game is turned off. In response to this, Tommy Tallarico launched 4 different Kickstarter campaigns, raising over $1 million to make more albums. But I have to say, I was fooled by a cover. This is their newest album. It's also on Spotify. And I couldn't quite tell from the cover itself what it's about. There's a very deliberate pun here. Classical music, classic games. Classical games, classic music. We're drawing parallels here. These are 17 tracks recorded live in Paris with the Irish queen of game music, Emer Noon, conducting. These are new arrangements made for 18 instruments. You can really, and these are instrumental chamber arrangements. There's no electric guitar to be found. You can really hear different instruments very intricately. I highly recommend listening to this. But these big players are not the only tours that exist. In Europe, Ubisoft picked up the torch in having Assassin's Creed Symphony happen. You could say they picked a really bad time to be trying to tour. But they performed in the 2019 E3 Ubisoft presentation. In making this presentation, I also found out that in the Kingdom Hearts 3, you can buy a pack which contains both the Remind DLC and a concert video. What that concert video is a recording from the Kingdom Hearts Orchestra World of Tres tour in Japan from last year. Other tours include Undertale Live, a sort of choose-your-own-adventure style of concert. This is, I believe, for Fifth House Ensemble, for a smaller ensemble. And an album is coming soon. I don't know what kind of soon that is, but. And when in March of 2020, when every concert got cancelled everywhere, Nier theatrical concert was set to perform in Tokyo. Instead of outright cancelling it, they performed it without audience. They did a Nico Nico Live broadcast. But because they had so many empty seats, they could fit much more cameras and equipment into the concert hall. And now, like half a year later, they're releasing the end result as a Blu-ray. This is a very emotional concert because the Nier music is kind of very melancholic. It's kind of the perfect music for this kind of somber, end of the world kind of mood. Knowing all this, I assumed that all game concerts are organized by these big players, big publishers, big concert producers. And they're all in like Central Europe, Japan, or North America. But I knew nothing, because a certain Urvar Säfström had heard about the first video game music live concert, the Hollywood Bowl one. And he showed the news article to Malmö Symphony Orchestra. And somehow he managed to convince them to make a game concert of their own. 17,000 people for the first game music concerts. And they've been making game music concerts ever since. Now, it's this Urvarsaftrem that's in the poster. The way they do it is they do themed concerts, sci-fi concert, a fantasy music concert, a horror concert, a bad guy theme concert. And they've been doing this all over the Nordic countries for a long time. I couldn't exactly count how many concerts because only some of them have Facebook events, but over 50, let's just say. You can find them, they're quite elusive, but you can find them on Facebook. There might even be a few YouTube videos. You may, if you were keen-eyed, you may have seen there was Turku right there. Now, history repeats. During these difficult times, there's a fifth collaboration between Turku Philharmonic Orchestra and Underscore Productions. You know it's 2020 when it's a feature of a concert to not be cancelled. We must bear in mind, this is probably agreed upon like 2 years ago, and they simply decided not to cancel it. There's limited seating. I checked the ticket sales. This is happening next month. So remember the three things and also take care of yourself. Now, there's a further thing inspired by these concerts. Michelle Eng in the University of Maryland was inspired by Video Games Live, their dear friends and video game pianist, to form her own video game music concert at the university campus. The way you do it is you first start small and humble. They first went to the internet to download game MIDIs and put them into Sibelius. And if you know music, that's a horrible way to do it. So they had to learn arrangement. But then they had their first concert, quite humble at first. Footage from that has also been released on YouTube. But then what you do is you grow. You tell your friends, you use Facebook, all the different posters around campus, you run fundraising, you make it into a non-profit organization, and then you just grow and stay awesome. Now, I think I said something along the lines of dozens of video game orchestras. Yeah, there's more than a dozen. Some of these are community orchestras, meaning they're not in university campuses. But some have the abbreviations for different universities, University of California, and so on. But I don't have time to talk about these, because there are even more video game orchestras around the world. In recent years, many have appeared in the UK. And actually, the Undertale Virtual Orchestra predates the current situation. But the Virtual Video Game Orchestra was specifically founded as response to what's going on. Some of these have been in existence for a long time. And, you know, these are kind of easy to find when they're called video game orchestra. But some, like in Japan, use more creativity. You see, you know what LUMO stands for. It's Liu Unique Magical Orchestra of Soundtracks. Yeah. The thing about being first at something is you get to pick the name first. Video Game Orchestra was founded in Boston in 2009. And it's actually more of a rock orchestra, playing rock orchestral music, which you can check out on their YouTube channel. They've also been uploading older performance videos. But with things going the way they are, they're making an unplugged album, making acoustic music. Now, there's a bit of a language barrier. It's really easy to find recommendations on YouTube in English, but there are other languages. In English, in French, it's l'orchestre de jeux vidéo. But actually, that's not the whole truth, because that's Quebec French. That's in Quebec, Canada. Because in proper metropolitan French, you're supposed to say l'orchestre de musique vidéoludique. Yeah. Speaking of that, they recently did a concert in Paris, which they live streamed on YouTube. Just the other day. But that's not all. You see, kind of the reverse happened. First, Japan inspired video game music concerts in the rest of the world. Then Video Games Live went to Japan instead. And a certain Yusuke Ichihara thought, hang on, how is there this specialized orchestra playing video game music professionally and touring around the world just playing video game music? How come they have this thing overseas? How come we don't have this thing in Japan? Well, that wasn't strictly true. It was actually one of the 6 Tokyo symphonic orchestras playing. So in later interviews, he notes, it seems my misunderstanding led to the birth of a professional game music orchestra. Here's the website from 2003. Japan Background Music Philharmonic Orchestra is Japan's first pro orchestra that performs mostly game music. This didn't actually last. Ichihara was both the director of the board and the conductor. He had too much workload. They did a couple of concerts, but the turnout wasn't great because they didn't have time to do marketing. So the pro orchestra, as in a corporation, dissolved. But instead, the musicians volunteered to form the new Japan Background Music Philharmonic Orchestra, inheriting the ideals of the previous one. The ideals include fun of game music for everybody. That is, everybody as in also people who don't play video games. It's fully volunteer-run, non-profit, to give them the creative freedom to promote video games the way they like. And they're professional musicians working for different studios, different orchestras, some even for the anime and games industry. Now, their idea is to play monthly, so that in cafes and restaurants, so that the game music is part of the daily life. So the question is, what do you get when you combine techno and Tetris? You get Technotris. When Tetris was ultimately released in Japan, the Japanese version had additional music. And so Technotris was composed. This track dates back to 1985. And it's not the point of the New Japan BGM Philharmonic Orchestra to play the most known, most popular tracks. Because there's plenty of good music that's simply not well known. So that's the type of music they play, and the string quartet is kind of, and other smaller ensembles like brass quintet or clarinet quintet are kind of the signature, also on their YouTube channel. Come 2020, everything's cancelled. But what they did do is they made us hand washing with Mario. So we can do our 20-second hand washing. Thank you. Another pro orchestra arose from the original. Japan Game Music Orchestra, JAGMO. Their vision is to make game music go down in history. That means that it should be remembered for future generations in the history of music. Their Twitter bio actually says, Japan's first game music pro orchestra. Sounds familiar. Now, what they do is they do what amateur orchestras cannot. They tour around Japan. Because they can rehearse on regular weekdays, on regular working hours, because they're professional musicians. Whereas most amateur orchestras rehearse on weekends and play like 1 or 2 concerts per year. They can also make albums, because as a corporation, they can do all of the different necessary contracts with the bigger players to distribute their music. So far, their albums are incredibly hard to come by, only usually sold at their concerts. Now, the Symphonic Suite, Suikoden, is a 5 CD arrangement that's actually, it's the same word as the Symphonic Suite Yamato, Kokyo Kumikyoku. So it's basically the same tradition. Let's look at one of their concerts. Gensekyo Symphony Orchestra. That's in reference to the fantasy, land of fantasy, the world into which Toho project is set. In the concert hall, we have the concert program. The first act, the intermission, and the second act. Then we arrive at the ticket office, where we can get our double S rank tickets, or the A rank tickets. After that, there's some basic information like, hey, this is the name of the concert, the venue, how to get there from the metro station, time and date. This was actually postponed 6 months. And then in this section, the red text says, the venue has changed to a different venue. If you bought your tickets 6 months ago, you need to change your tickets to newer ones. All guests must wear a mask. They're going to measure your temperature. The underlying text is saying they're not going to be selling their physical CDs on the venue to reduce the risk of infection. And other measures like increasing ventilation and social distancing for the seats. That was the patronage program for those who want to support in other ways. And here we can tweet about wanting to go to the concert. Here we can request songs, and at the bottom is a helpful guide telling us where we can check things like dress code, and there's a guide on how to express emotions. So you know that yelling "Bravo!" is totally fine. But we are here far away. But we are lucky because we have word from JAGMO producer. They're gonna be streaming the concert for free on YouTube at a later date. And I thought, I knew nothing. I thought that was it. But actually, we have one of the biggest music universities in Europe, Sibelius Academy. And what do you know? We have young, talented, ambitious musicians wondering, there's all this great video game music, and it's so popular on YouTube. How come no one's playing it live, to a live audience? So they found Game Music Collective. It's announced in the summer of 2017. And the same thing, it's formed out of 20 musicians. It's basically a string quintet, a woodwind quintet, a brass quintet, percussionist, and the conductor. But they make a big sound because they fuse the electronic of the video games with the traditional orchestra instruments. And they're also so good at playing at what they do. They can pull off crazy solos. That's kind of how their arrangements are constructed. They also do concerts with the 20-member EUGA male core. They do the same thing as the first concert in Europe. They put it together with a game developer conference event. Whereas those were at the start of the conference, this is at the end. Their debut concert. No one has ever heard these guys play in 2017. Even I'm in the concert. I'm wondering, what is this going to be like? Is this going to match my expectations? What are they going to play? But the response is immense. In the concert, we didn't even let the conductor walk off the stage for the intermission because we were clapping so hard. He had to come back on the stage to tell us to take a break. The standing ovations lasted much longer than in the video because my audio gets distorted the longer the video goes on. Such is the way of phone microphones. This was very emotional. You see, it's the greatest feeling when you're in a concert and you can sense the overall mood in the concert hall. You can get the sense that pretty soon the track will end. I know without any doubt that the whole audience is going to stand up in unison to give a standing ovation. That is why I picked up my phone and recorded that video, which I later posted as a public service announcement. Game Music Collective is awesome. But I still knew nothing, because in Japan there are such things as game music festivals. Japan Game Music Festival, Fukuoka Game Music Festival, Tokai Game Music Festival, Hiroshima Game Music Festival. And the game takt is even more elaborate. Takt is a German word for conductor's baton. That's like an event with multiple concerts, lots of invited composers, panels, all sorts of things. And what do you know? A certain Nicholas Bruman had been to Japan and knew about all of these game music festivals. And he decided to name his the same way, Helsinki Game Music Festival. I actually took part in this as a helping hand, helping out with the organization. Now, everything had already been mostly taken care of, so my humble contribution was to tape the programs on the walls. Now, when we heard that there's going to be a second stage in the lobby where people could play music, we thought like, yeah, let's let people play. Maybe someone will show up and maybe he'll play something. There's a grand piano and, you know. But the response to the Helsinki Game Music Festival was overwhelming. So many people signed up to play on the second stage, on the smaller stage, in the lobby, that they could only get 15-minute slots to play during the intermissions between the different concerts. In this concert, that is the picture Yle chose for their Nicholas Bruman interview of him in the big hall. The performance were the usual suspects. Game Music Collective, and in Finland, Quinsonitus, a brass quintet playing video game music in recent years. But also, we have our own core that sings soundtrack music. Of course, they would be there. Ramon van Engelenhoven, a pianist virtuose, playing game music. And Meine Meinung from Japan. But alas, it's really hard to pull off such a festival all on your own. A dream was filled. Nicholas Bruman is no longer in the business of organizing game music concerts, but he wishes to have had a positive impact on the live video game music scene in Finland. But all hope is not lost. There's such a thing as Finnish Game Music Project. Game Music Collective got 200,000 euros to collect, arrange, perform and record music from Finnish games, Finnish game composers. Finnish games industry is now 25 years old, counting from the founding of Remedy and Housemarque. Now is a great time to collect that heritage. There's going to be a collection album performed by the full Game Music Collective Orchestra. There's going to be a release concert associated with the album in 2021. And there are going to be music videos for the tracks featured. But even that is not all. In 2006, one of the aforementioned Final Fantasy tours, a New World intimate music from Final Fantasy, played in Poland. And the Poles thought, why don't we play game music ourselves? Why don't we organize a concert ourselves? The next year arrived the Symphony of Heroes, playing the music from the Heroes of Might and Magic series. The Heroes Orchestra actually has a YouTube channel, and they have 2 full concerts on YouTube that you can go and watch right now. These are awesome, both in terms of sound quality, but also the quality of the music. Even if you've never played any Heroes of Might and Magic games, the quality of the music speaks for itself. And in the other concert, the composer himself, Paul Anthony Romero, is jamming on the stage, playing on the grand piano. It's great. But then they got the idea, why don't we make a game music festival in Poland? And so it was that in 2018, they had 4 different concerts from different composers, and they invited the composers to listen to these arrangements. 2019, 3 more concerts. And you might be thinking, 2020, surely, but we have a Game Music Festival 2020 in Poland. Now, there's very limited seating. So what they decided to do is to stream all the concerts online. Also happening, I believe, next month. But that is not all. You see, TracOff is a role-playing and anime con. And can you imagine a convention where the main focus is gaming and music, where musicians and music enthusiasts gather? There is such a convention. It's called MAGFest, Music and Gaming Festival, organized annually at the Gaylord Hotel. And the thing is, it's grown really big, over 20,000 people. All the American game music scene basically happens here. This is where people get to know each other. This is where people meet, where they decide on collaborations. This is where everything happens. This is where magic happens. Now, I only picked, they have a ton of different concerts every year for different sizes of ensembles, string quartets, rock bands, metal bands, all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. Beat rave, all of the electronic stuff, video game DJ battles. But I picked these two. The aforementioned Washington Metropolitan Gamer Symphony Orchestra played there in 2018. There's also Journey Live, which is Journey being played from start to finish with Fifth House Ensemble playing the music as you play the game. It's actually, this was the first performance, and it's up on YouTube with Austin Wintory himself conducting the orchestra. There's also one very interesting project. There's such a thing as Super Smash Opera. The grand idea was to take the classical opera arias and put new lyrics on them to make it about video games. And when they announced it was going to be on MAGFest, questions started coming in like, when are the auditions going to start? And they're like, what auditions? Don't they know that we plan to play the backtrack from the tape? But auditions they did organize. And soon you have a full symphony orchestra made up of different individual musicians from the different string quartets, brass quintets, all of the different musicians and bands visiting MAGFest. That is the kind of the spirit of MAGFest. All of the different musicians mingling together to make great stuff. And once more, there's so many things you could credit to being formed at MAGFest. One of those is Materia Collective. It's a record label for video game music. And they've done a ton of different video game music cover albums. One of the more recent ones is actually Hang On to Your Hat, Video Game Jazz Orchestra. Now, this orchestra was put together for this album specifically, but it fits the overall theme of different video game orchestras. That's just one example. And here in Japan, the situation is that you could get sheet music, especially for piano, for almost any game. And then they make a listing like, oh yeah, and then there are these English language sheet musics for these indie games such as Undertale. Now it turns out those are the ones that Materia Collective has made in the US. So when I was little, maybe I would have wanted to play instruments. And maybe I could play instruments if there had been video game sheet music back then. MAGFest 2021. Things are very unsure, I'm sure. But let us not despair. We have to wait and see what happens. There's a huge community behind MAGFest. Every year they've streamed concerts from MAGFest. I'm sure something will come out of MAGFest 2021. Probably not a 20,000 people gathering, but something. And finally, I would like to say, listen to good music and play video games, or even play good music and listen to video games. Thank you.